Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We have started out on this trip for a specific purpose. Firstly, to make clear to our students the nature of our treatment work, because far too few have been active in healing, and I'm sure that it is only because they do not understand the nature of treatment work or the necessity for it, or perhaps that they have not caught the specific principles on which infinite way healing is based. Healing work in this message is based on entirely different principles than any of the metaphysical or religious healing movements or activities. There are two reasons for this. In the beginning of my search, I observed that always the world is seeking for some greater power to do something to a lesser power. In early days, when men fought with bows and arrows, someone else came along with a rifle or a revolver, and the poor fellows who had nothing but bows and arrows just went out of existence. And so when machine guns came along and cannon, the rifle and the revolver were limited in their use. By the time we came up to bombs, all the rest of them were worthless. Always a greater power destroys a lesser power. And of course, if you keep going far enough along that line, you come to where we are today, when it wouldn't do you any good even if you could find a bigger power than nuclear power, because it not only destroys those you throw it at, but it destroys those who throw it. Now, it is the same in every phase of life. The stronger man overcomes the weaker man, the stronger nation overcomes the weaker nation. Until you wonder, where is the end of this power? Or where is the end of power? There was a time when the human mind was, well, let's call it virgin. That is, when nobody had ever used a mental power on a mental power, when no one had ever mentalized anyone else. Mental healing was a simple thing. You only had to say you are well and you are perfect and you are spiritual. And lo and behold, it was so. In other words, it was a very simple thing for a person with a little developed mental power to completely transform the thoughts and feelings of those who yielded their minds to be acted upon. But as in everything else, the mind built up a defense. And it isn't as easy now to heal by mental treatments because mind has built this defense. You almost have to hypnotize a person to get control of their mind. And so again, we find that whereas originally a mental power overcame a physical discord, that isn't so readily done now. And so it was that many, many years ago, I saw the futility of seeking for a power to overcome the discords and inharmonies of life. As a matter of fact, I even went so far as to realize that not even the power of God would do that. And so the search wasn't for another power. The search was for a principle. And when the principle revealed itself, it was the principle of no power, or none power, what Gandhi called non-resistance, what Jesus called resist not evil, non-resistance, turn the other cheek, walk a second mile. Applied to living, this proved to be a most wonderful principle. Since then it has proved to be the principle of life. Applied to healing, it has done very wonderful things. But although the writings convey that principle, teach it, emphasize it, very few students catch it. The reason is that we have had so many centuries of being indoctrinated with two powers, and of always seeking a greater power with which to overcome a lesser power, that we do not even realize that we are reading a principle about which we heretofore have not heard, since it was used in the New Testament and discarded. You know, it's a strange thing about things that are in print. Ordinarily, I suppose, it is believed that because a person reads a book, that they have read what was in it. You only have to be a teacher for a little while to find out how far from the truth that is. Very few people seem to have the capacity of reading a book and then knowing what it was that they read. Even if they read it every day of their lives, they still cannot read the print that is in it, because they can't read anything contrary to their preconceived knowledge or belief. And that is why people, and even ministers, can read the New Testament every single day of their lives, and then when you say to a minister especially, how many days a week do you keep your church open to pray for the enemies? They wonder where you ever heard such a ridiculous thing. Where did you get such an idea from? And when you point out that the Master said, it profiteth you nothing to pray for your friends, you must pray for your enemies in order to be the sons of God, it is almost as if they are accusing you of having put that in there the night before. In the same way, when you say, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, it is almost as if those you were saying it to had never heard it, had never read it, and yet they are reading it every single day, almost, of their lives. So it is, I know, that when students read the Infinite Way writings, they don't read what's in it. They read their conception of what's in it based on what they have already known or learned or practiced. And therefore, they see their own concepts in there. They don't see the print and the words and the meaning. And sometimes when they do, they take it right out of its context instead of reading it in the line of the entire message. A minister did that one time, wrote me a letter to the effect that he loved the Infinite Way, loved the writings, agreed heartily with most of it, but I was all wrong about teaching that you must not pray for things, because Jesus said in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. And when I wrote back to the minister that Jesus was entirely right, but that he wasn't talking about baker's bread, because he said, I am the bread. I am the wine, I am the water. Therefore, he wasn't speaking of baker's bread or H2O or the vineyard wine. He was talking about the spiritual substance or the spiritual staff of life. And yet, in spite of the Master saying, take no thought what you shall eat, people go on year in and year out praying for baker's bread or for food, instead of taking the Master's message as a whole and realize that at no point did he ever pray for a thing. In fact, when he was hungered, he wouldn't even pray for food then. Not even when he was hungered. If you take his message as a whole, you realize that the Father within me is Spirit. And you find no occasion in his writings to believe, or in his message to believe, that there was room for praying to God for something, or asking God, or expecting something from God, except the wisdom, the activity, the substances of the Spirit. Now, so it is that the entire message of the Infinite Way is based on living a spiritual life and using spiritual principles for our healing work. And throughout the writings it is made clear that the spiritual principle does not consist of using a power or getting a power or even turning to God for a power, but rather realizing the non-power of that which is presented to us as the appearance. In other words, it states it in so many words over and over in the writings that the major principle of the work is the nature of error. The two principles are the nature of God, and the second one is the nature of error. But for healing work, and it says so definitely, the more important principle of the two is the nature of error. There are many, many, many people in the world who not only know the nature of God, but have had actual God contact, and yet have never been healed and can't heal. Some of the greatest known mystics of the world, people who lived constantly in the consciousness of God, were sick all their lives, because unless one attains the realization of God not as a power, but rather attains the realization of error as not having power, therefore not needing a God power to do anything to it, one cannot accomplish spiritual healing. Mental healing, yes. Mental healing is merely an individual with either a natural or a developed power of mental concentration, using that with a person who either hasn't that developed mental power or yields their mind to another. But spiritual healing is entirely different. Spiritual healing isn't an appeal to God. There is an evangelical healing which is, there is a faith healing which is, but not spiritual healing, because spiritual healing means understanding the nature of spirit as infinite being. There can't be infinity and an opposition to it or something other than its own nature. And so it is that right from the beginning, the Infinite Way has tried to make clear that healing work is based primarily on the understanding of the nature of error. In other words, the nothingness of that which is given to us as sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation. Now, I understand full well the difficulty that is involved. So many metaphysicians have just accepted statements of truth and gone about saying that disease has no power, or error has no power, or matter has no power, and then found that nothing happened. That they're puzzled. Also, there's another angle that makes the understanding of the spiritual principle difficult. In the human world, you have two definite powers: material power and mental power. Now, neither material power nor mental power are spiritual, nor are they of God. They come forth from the second chapter of Genesis, which is a creation of the mind of man. But nevertheless, we were born into this world of material force and mental power, and those are the two powers recognized, and those are the two powers by which human experience are lived. Take away material force and mental power and you'd have no human existence. So that just by virtue of being born, we're born into an experience whereby if you hit this hard enough, it's going to get black and blue. And if you strike the heart with a bullet, you're going to stop it. We do know that in the human experience, material force and power are tremendous things. The powers of infection, of contagion. They ravish the world at times. They're so powerful. And since the last century, mental power is becoming more and more of a force and power. In the beginning, this power of the mind was used for good. The man who first introduced it into the world was Anton Mesmer, and he introduced it for a very good purpose, that of healing the sick. And as it spread from Germany to England and England back to France, always, whenever mental power was used by him or his students, it was used for the power, the purpose of healing disease. When it first made its appearance in the United States, first through Quimby and then through Mrs. Eddy, it was also used for the purpose of healing the sick. But then some of Mrs. Eddy's students discovered that you could also use the power of mind destructively. And they did. She caught them at it and exposed it. Ever since then, of course, it's known that you can use the power of the mind for good or you can use it for evil. To begin with, it depends a good deal on your own nature. If your own nature is innately good, if your instincts in life are not only to be good but to do good, there isn't any possibility that you would use the powers of your mind injuriously or destructively or to anyone's loss. But unfortunately, all human beings aren't built that way, and therefore, when they discover how the power of mind can be used to injure others, to destroy their health, to take their money from them, the temptation is sometimes too great for them to overcome. And so we find in this age a very destructive mental power. We find it in national affairs, whenever it's to the interest of a country or a government rather, to sway their people. They know the ways now of putting out propaganda and making them do anything they want. And that's been known for a long, long time, been used by one government administration after another in different countries. Now, the latest exhibition of it, of course, was the experiments that were tried with subliminal perception in advertising, which was nothing more nor less than an attempt to make you buy something that was desire to be sold, whether or not you wanted it, whether or not you could afford it. That didn't enter these people's minds. That was not their business. Their business was to sell. And if you could be made to buy it, even to your injury or destruction or loss, that was not their concern. They were in business to make money. So you see that mental power can be used for good or for evil, just as material force can be used for good or for evil. You can use the strength of your hands to give or to get, to pet or to punch. You can use your body in so many different ways that bless and so many different ways that curse. Now, because material force can be used for good or evil, and because mental force can be used for good or evil, you have the assurance then that they are not of God. For God cannot be used for good or evil. God can be used for neither good nor evil, for the simple reason that God can't be used. God is infinite being. God is infinite spirit. God is a state of is. God is the same yesterday and today and forever. So you can't use God. God is infinity. Can't expect anything less than infinity to act on infinity, to move it, to influence it, to use it. God can't be used. And God cannot use itself destructively. God is the creative, maintaining, and sustaining principle of life, of all form, of all being. Therefore, there is not a thing in God's creation that can ever be destroyed, or injured, or harmed. Now, when you begin to perceive this, you know right well that in the material and in the mental realm, the only things that are going to act on each other will be a greater force, and a greater force, and a greater force. And thus you would be caught really on a wheel from which there would be no escape, just as these governments are right now. Caught on this wheel of nuclear fission, each one fearing the other, each one scared to death that they'll frighten the other, each one alarmed that the other will do something first. It's a wheel of fear. There's no escape from it. Don't ever think there is. And no escape. As long as one is thinking in terms of power, more power, or using power first, there's no escape. The only escape from that wheel is to learn of that which nullifies power. That's all. Not to seek for more power. Now, the unfoldment that led to the infinite way was exactly that. And the revelation was that material power and mental power dissolve, either one or both, dissolve in the presence of no power. Both dissolve in the realization that neither material power nor mental power were created by God, are maintained or sustained by God, or that they have a law to support them. Then you find how quickly the erroneous manifestations of force and power dissolve and leave in your experience that which we will call harmonious material and mental conditions, but which aren't that at all. They're really spiritual conditions interpreted by our finite sense as harmonious material and mental conditions. In other words, you take even the insane, and with this work produce sanity. And of course, to all appearance, all you have done is change a wrong mental condition into a right mental condition, but that isn't what has happened. What has happened is you've dissolved the mental condition and brought to light the spiritual wisdom or spiritual mind of the individual, which is not subject to change or to chance or to accident. In the same way, when you are healing and a physical discord disappears, it might be a fever, it might be a lump, it might be an overgrowth or an undergrowth, it may be an overactive organ or an underactive organ, but the moment it is restored, it is not the change from discordant matter to harmonious matter. It is the dissolution of the belief in the power of matter, or the power of force, material or mental, and then the revelation of spiritual activity and spiritual substance and spiritual harmony, although to our eyes, to our five physical senses, it will merely appear as if a discordant condition of body became harmonious, or a discordant condition of mind became harmonious. But actually it isn't. It is the dissolution of the belief of either material or mental power and the discernment of spiritual activity, which to us appears mental or physical. Now, when you understand this, you can reduce the healing treatment to a simple process, one that is not difficult to understand, one that is not difficult to attain, although a time element is necessary. Now, the reason for the time element is this: because a truth is truth doesn't make it operate. An individual has to attain much more than the intellectual knowledge of the truth before it operates. Again, this isn't true on the physical or the mental plane. Anybody that learns the laws of electricity can hook it up. Not so with spiritual truth, not so in spiritual healings. Even if I give you the principle that God's allness means total harmony throughout the entire universe, God, the creative, maintaining, and sustaining principle of all that is, ensures that his universe is harmonious from everlasting to everlasting, and that nothing can enter the realm of God that defileth or maketh a lie. Therefore, the principle is God is all and all is harmonious. Then I could go on to the second part of the principle and say that because of the first part, any form of error, discord, inharmony, whether physical, mental, moral, or financial, having no law of God to uphold it or support it or sustain it, is a nothingness, what the Hebrew prophet called the arm of flesh. Nothingness. What Jesus said to Pilate, thou couldst have no power over me unless it came from the Father. Now I give you those two principles, and then I say to you, they're not going to do you any good. And I mean it. I'm not fooling about it. They won't do a thing for you, although both are true. Only as you take those two principles and work with them, apply them day by day in your daily experience, even though you may not be getting the results you're seeking, apply them just as you would practice scales on the piano or practice scales in singing, not because you're bringing forth harmony, but because if you don't keep on practicing, you'll never bring forth harmony. So with this, you have to work with these principles until your consciousness changes. Now, let us acknowledge this, that every human being in the world has a consciousness that believes in both good and evil. And actually, their belief in evil is far greater than their belief in good. That is why all human experience has more of evil in it than good. That is why evil is feared more than God is loved or trusted. Because evil predominates in human experience, and we have the greater belief in it. Now, here we are entertaining. For generations, this has been built up in us. My parents believed it, their parents believed it, and their parents believed it. So it comes down to us so strongly that there are two powers, good and evil. And so just because you read in a book that God is all power and evil is no power, is not going to make you demonstrate it. Why? Because you don't believe it, even if you accept it intellectually. Accepting it intellectually just means you'd like to believe it. You'd love to be able to demonstrate it. Sure, so would everybody. It's an ideal condition if you can reach it. But you don't believe it, even when you first read it, and something within you says that's true. If God is all, then error can't be real. But that's only a first step. You've learned the principle. The principle is God. Infinite God, infinite good. God, infinite law, infinite being, infinite substance. God, omnipotence, the all-power. Omnipresence, the only presence. Omniscience, the only wisdom. God, the only reality, the only cause, the only creative principle. Then, because of this, all evil is just a negation. It's just a belief in two powers. Now, when you begin to work with this, applying it to everything that touches your life, whether it's something personal to you or impersonal, eventually that intellectual agreement as to these principles becomes a developed consciousness. And then all of a sudden someone says, oh, there's a fluid epidemic on the way, and your face lights up and you say, but God's the only power. And in that second, you have prevented flu touching your household. Not because you said it, but because in that second you had an inner conviction, that is, the actual consciousness of it. The same way, You may have a law case, and if you were to use this principle, you'd realize that God is the only lawgiver, so it doesn't lie within the jurisdiction of a judge or a jury to give any verdict. God is the only judge and God is the only jury, and only from God can emanate law. Yes, that's the true principle, but and because it's true doesn't mean you're going to demonstrate it in this law case. Because all the way back in your mind is that age-old conviction, oh, what's the jury going to say? What's the judge going to say? And all the power is in the attorneys and the judges and the juries, and you're just saying that God is the judge and the jury isn't going to make it so. But if you work with this principle, day in and day out, facing not only your lawsuits, but everybody else's, and practice, no decision of man is decision. God is the only decision. God is the only judge. God is the only lawgiver. God is the only law enforcer. God is the law. And man whose breath is in his nostril has no jurisdiction. Cease ye from man whose breath is in his nostril, for wherein is he to be accounted of, even if he wears the clothes of a jury or the robe of a judge. And as you work with that principle, eventually that consciousness dawns on you. I shall not fear what mortal man can do to me. And in that second, you've made it utterly impossible for a judge or a jury ever in your experience to come into your life with any injustice or lack of justice or inequality. You've absolutely made it impossible for any man, prince or potentate, to have an erroneous influence or power in your experience. But not because you've studied a truth message, but because you've practiced it to such an extent that you have attained the actual consciousness, the actual inner awareness that God is the only voice. And when he utters his voice, the earth melted. Now do you see that the fault of our students is they have read these things, but they haven't discerned them as principles of life and then applied them. They've read them and enjoyed them and felt, oh, I'm so grateful that that's true. Then they haven't been able to make it true in their lives. And no one can. These principles have to be worked with and worked with and worked with until we pass, or our language in our writings is, make the transition from the intellectual knowledge to the spiritual perception or actual consciousness. I suppose on a human level we can liken it to the person who can play piano by reading the notes up there and following every note along, and the other person who has music in him and just sits down and it flows out. Now, so it is. From the very moment that we perceive these two principles, we could begin to do healing work if we would give good, specific treatments, and sometimes give them frequently. That is, we might have to repeat them 2 and 3 or 4 times in a day, always holding the treatment to these principles. Not sitting around with some kind of a religious face, waiting for God or Jesus to do some miracle in your life. Not sitting around piously believing, well, I'm good and I deserve to have good happen to me. There have been better people than you and I on earth that have had lots of worse things happen to them. Being good will not bring spiritual power into your life. All of the people who live by the 10 Commandments are good. And sometimes they're more difficult to heal than the sinners. You see, it's very easy to work with a sinner and very easy to heal them, because a sinner knows right well that they've been sinning, and they know they're unworthy, and they want to be healed, and it develops in them a sense of humility, a sort of, I don't deserve it, but I sure hope for it. And in their very humility, they open themselves to God's grace. And these people who live rigidly by the 10 Commandments are so sure of their own goodness that they forget that only God is good. They forget that even Jesus said, why callest thou me good? He knew the source of goodness wasn't himself, it was God. And that's why it is that until a person gives up their self-righteousness, until a person gives up this sense that I am good, I am honest, I am moral, they stand in their own light, in the light of their own spiritual development, because it becomes necessary for everyone sooner or later to realize if there's any goodness in me at all, it's God functioning. And in that realization, the necessary humility is there. It's the same in healing work. The moment a person believes that they have healing power, or that they are spiritual, you can be assured of this: they're barren. They're as barren as the barren trees. Because it never could be true. Nobody can have healing power, and nobody can ever be good. Nobody can ever be spiritual. The reason is God is spirit, and God is good, and God's grace is spiritual, and we are just the instruments through which that appears. Like a tree. A tree isn't good. Really, a tree isn't even fruitful. A tree is just something that stands there and lets nature work, and the fruit appears. And all the tree did was stand there. It was the force of nature that was fruitful, not the tree. And so with us, when spirit flows through us, when healing flows through us, it is the activity of God, the Spirit of God itself, and we are just the instruments through which it comes. And that's why Jesus could so clearly state it. I of my own self can do nothing. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. And he never would bear witness to himself or speak of his own powers. And that is why when he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he doesn't say Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. He says I. And that's quite a different thing, because I is I. Even 2,000 years after Jesus has left the scene, I is still I, and I is still the way, the truth, and the life. Now, the sooner that the world perceives that I in the midst of you is the Christ, not a person and not a limited personality, the sooner will you understand, will the world understand, why the kingdom of God is closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Because the only thing closer to you than breathing and nearer than hands and feet is, declare it, I. And when you say I, you can really feel it there. Now, when you stop believing that that I is a limited person, and understand that that I is what Jesus meant when he said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will be with you until the end of the world. He didn't say Jesus will be with you. He knew right well that Jesus was going to go from the scene. He knew that. It was ordained. But he said, I. And he told you that Jesus of himself could do nothing. Even if he could stay on earth, he could do nothing. But he said, I, before Abraham was, I am with you. I will be with you to the end of the world. Then you will know why you do not have to take thought for your food, for your clothing, for your raiment. That is why you do not have to fear the passing of years, as if they could bring age. Of course they can, as long as you're on the physical and mental level. It is only when you begin to understand that I in the midst of me is the very Christ. I in the midst of me is the healer, the Savior. I in the midst of me is that which raises from the dead. If you destroy this body, this temple, I will raise it up again, not Jesus. If you destroy Jesus, I will raise it up. And that's why we read later, the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead will raise up also your mortal bodies. What Spirit is that? The I that was declared by Moses, that changed him from a shepherd to a leader, the I that changed Jesus from a Hebrew rabbi to a Christian founder. I makes that change. It has made everyone. It took a man named Gautama and made him Buddha. All you have to do is realize that I in you is not a limited personality. That I in you was not born on your birth date. No, that I brought your body into this world merely as an instrument for its functioning. If you study the Infinite Way long enough, have its classes, you find out that you aren't even in your body. You know that. Every one of our classes, we have that experience of searching from the toes to the top of the head and discovering that we aren't there. And we aren't. No surgery yet has ever revealed an individual inside their body. Never. Never. No one has ever been found inside of a body. Nothing's ever been found in there but flesh and blood and bone. Never a person, never a consciousness, never an I. Just doesn't exist there. And so you learn as you practice. Am I in my feet? No. Are my feet me? Certainly not. My feet are mine. My knees are mine. My limbs are mine. My chest is mine. My stomach is mine. My head is mine. My ears, my eyes, my throat, my hair. All this is mine. Now where's the me that owns it all? Where am I? And so again, you race up and down the body and inside and out, and you will find me and you will find you. Because you can't find I in the body. You can't find consciousness or soul or spirit in the body. And you are I. You are spirit, soul. You are consciousness. You are life eternal. I am life eternal. I am the resurrection and the life. And so the very moment you begin to realize, I am not body, but I have a body. Not only that, but I was given dominion over it. And everything in the earth and beneath the earth and above the earth. Then you begin to have a different sense of this I, a different respect for it, a different realization of its nature, and you will learn gradually that embodied in the I that I am is all that I will ever need unto eternity. Whether it is a home today or whether it is a body, whether it is transportation or food, whether it is wisdom or knowledge, understanding, whether it is talent, art, or science, whatever it is that I will need throughout eternity is embodied in the I that I am as potentiality, and each day it unfolds as experience. Now, there's no use of $1 million unfolding to me today. I have no use for it, and the care of it would be burdensome. Therefore, in my experience, money unfolds each day or week or month as the need for it arises and a few baskets full left over to share. So it is. I don't have to think today of what truth I'm going to say tonight, because I don't need it. I would just trip over my own tongue. I'd get all balled up in my own memory if I tried to think of what I need tonight. Sufficient unto tonight is the need of tonight. And then God says to Moses, don't think of what you're going to say. Open your mouth. And I'll put the words there. Certainly. Open your purse and I'll put the money there. Whatever the need is, open your consciousness, transportation, whatever it may be, and I will put it there. How do I know that you need it? I in the midst of you is the very wisdom. I is closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. It knows my need greater than I do, more than I do. But, you see, telling the students this, having it in books, on tapes, does very little for them. Unless they take it home and put it into practice. Sitting around waiting for it to happen, it never will. It never will. We have to live in the consciousness of this I. We have to abide in this word. We have to remember from waking up in the morning till sleeping at night, I in the midst of me is mighty. I in the midst of me is life, eternal. I in the midst of me is my daily food and my daily housing and my transportation. I in the midst of me is the resurrection unto my whole body and business and career. I in the midst of me is the Christ of God, which has come to earth to heal the sick, redeem the lost years of the locust. I in the midst of me. As you work with this, abide with it, pray with it, meditate with it, all of a sudden it passes from an intellectual exercise into an experience. From then on, life is a spiritual expansion. But these principles of healing, and incidentally, I will repeat this, I have embodied them all in capsule form on these 10 tapes. And they have been stated and restated there in several different forms, and the application of them, so that it is simpler than it ever has been to learn the principles, but it isn't going to be any simpler to demonstrate them. The demonstration is still going to rest with those who practice them intellectually until they pass from the intellect to the spiritual awareness. Now, I can say this to you. Every spiritual healing that has ever taken place is a proof that the material law involved wasn't law. or that the mental law involved wasn't law. In other words, they were only law while they were accepted as law. But with spiritual perception, which means, of course, the recognition that Spirit alone is the reality, Spirit alone is the law, Spirit alone is eternality and immortality and omniscience and omniscience and omnipotence and omnipresence. The perception of that makes the material or mental discord disappear, because it only had the law of belief to support it. I suppose we saw the working out of that in this wonder drug, penicillin. I read that every shot of penicillin that's given today contains more penicillin than that which was given in the entire first year of its discovery. Why? Because the more you take, the more you need. It builds up a defense within itself. And each time you take it, you have to take that much more in order to make it effective. Now, you will find that infection, for instance, contagion, flu germs, so forth, in the material world they have power. And they act upon human beings in accord with the law that's been laid down for them. But the very minute that they come into contact with the spiritual realization of God as the only substance of being, the only cause, the only power, the only being, you will find that the germ doesn't operate anymore. That is why every healing of flu, every healing of polio, every healing of any of these infectious or contagious diseases is a proof that the law which gave it its power wasn't law. It was only law on the level of acceptance.